Families, friendship circles, workplaces. We're all part of numerous groups of people. Those groups can bring joy, safety, and humour, but also challenges. And the reasons why some of these groups work better than others can often come down to complex dynamics that it can be quite hard for us to understand while we're living through them. Well, in his new book, The Collective Edge, Unlocking the Secret Power of Groups, Dr. Colin Fisher explores how we can avoid the common pitfalls of living and working together and get the most from the relationships we form with those around us. And Dr. Colin Fisher joins us now. Colin, hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Hugo.
Welcome to TimesRadio. Great to have you here. Look, you started off as a professional jazz player. How did you end up writing a book about groups? Because do you think jazz, one would assume playing jazz is the least group-orientated thing you can do. It's a sort of free-for-all, isn't it?
Well, I think it's one of the most group-oriented things you can do. In part because what's great about jazz is that you're creating something that no one of you could have predicted that you could have created. So, you know, being part of these jazz groups, when you're improvising, the group kind of brings things out of you that you couldn't have thought of yourself. No one of us could have thought of yourself. And to me, that was kind of the way into thinking about group dynamics. And how is it that some groups seem to do this? And often irrespective of the kind of like talent of the individual members, that some groups just click and other groups just don't. And so understanding that's really been what I've been up to for the past 20 years.
Are you still a jazz musician? You still play?
I am still playing. So if you're around Northeast London, you may still find me in a jazz club somewhere.
What's your instrument?
Trumpet.
What a shame you didn't bring it. Look, you start your book with the controversial claim that the Sorting Hat is the true villain of Harry Potter. Explain that to us.
Well, the Sorting Hat seemed really ominous to me even the first time that I read Harry Potter. And it's because you're putting this hat on 11-year-olds, and it's reading your mind and then putting you into a group that's forever. Nobody in this book ever leaves the groups that they're sorted into, and they're actively encouraged to compete with one another. They're constantly, told, oh, you're a Gryffindor, that means you have to dislike these Slytherins. And then we see the wars that bookend the story, and I'm sorry if I'm spoiling Harry Potter for anyone, but they're the same lines that the Sorting Hat drew at the beginning of the story. And to me, even if there wasn't that particular Lord Voldemort, if you keep drawing lines between people and encouraging them to compete from a young age and telling them this is the way the world is, you're going to end up with some really messy intergroup conflict.
I mean, so I guess that to nail this down, that means what? So Draco Malfoy would have had a very different life had the Sorting Hat said something else.
Absolutely. I mean, that the characters are so typecast in the book that you almost never see these characters who aren't sort of drinking the Kool-Aid that the Sorting Hat and their houses are feeding them. So, yeah, I think everybody would have had very different lives if they were sorted into some other house. And that metaphor for the way, other people are sorting us and the way we're sorting ourselves has the same kind of impact on us.
I mean, that would suggest that groups can be very bad for us, bad for society generally. You're quite keen on them. Tell me about how you get from the one to the other.
Groups are the paradox that you're implying they are. That our worst impulses as human beings have this tribal quality where we're able to be more cruel to people we perceive to not be part of our own groups than we are to even animals or something. That intergroup dynamics are some of the most potent and dangerous dynamics we know of. But at the same time, when you go under all the wonderful things that are happening in the world, you look at the scientific discoveries, the world-changing businesses, all of these things are created by groups more now than at any time in the past. So, it's kind of as Margaret Mead said, that a small group of people is really the only thing that can ever change the world, and that we need them, and that this tension between the good and the bad is what keeps me in business, quite frankly, that it's something that's a paradox in our own psychology, and that we're always going to be kind of trying to keep the bad at bay and to harness the good parts of groups that give us the power to change the world.
You say the pinnacle of group cooperation is group synergy. What do you mean by group synergy?
Synergy, it may sound like a business buzzword, but I mean it in a very literal sense, that the groups are more than the sum of their parts. That if you added up what individuals can produce on their own, the group product will be greater than that. And that's the same as what we were talking about with jazz just a moment ago, where the group brings something out of us that we could not have produced on our own, and we couldn't have had, everybody in a different room recording their individual parts and just put them together. That we need to be interacting, we need to be playing off one another, and the kind of contrast and complementarities within the group make it greater than it otherwise would have been.
What kind of groups? Just to sort of like nail this down into things people have experienced. What kind of groups are and were you particularly focusing on? Do you mean workplace groups? Do you mean political parties? Do you mean religious groupings? And do they all have similarities?
They all have similarities, and I like to think of this on a continuum of what scholars call group entitativity, but that's unpleasant to say, so I call groupiness in the books. And that these kind of broad, big groups like political parties, like even nations, those have much less groupiness than small groups and teams like jazz ensembles, bands, sports teams, work teams. And the best chance of synergy occurs in these smaller, more groupy groups. And that's where we can actually meaningfully understand the contributions of every person, that we can all sit around a table and have a good conversation, whether that's a conversation at a dinner party or that's a conversation in a work meeting or a top management team where we're trying to make a decision. And that these kind of small teams of about 3 to 7 members are the ones that have the most potential. And that if you are just trying to, get something done with a political party as a whole, you're going to really struggle because the coordination problems in these very large groups are enormous, so enormous that we can't overcome them without breaking it down into smaller chunks.
Is a group more effective if it has an enemy that is another group?
A group is more motivated if it has an enemy. And there's a lot of great research that shows that having a rival does spur groups on to greater heights. But it also brings out these kind of negative tendencies where we tend to see other group members as less differentiated. So we see, everyone who's in a group that we consider to be our enemy as being relatively homogenous. We don't understand their individuality well. And then that leads us to be more ready to treat them like objects, to dehumanize them, and to mistreat them. So will we be more motivated if we have an enemy? Absolutely.
Right.
Will that always mean we do better things? Not necessarily.
In other words, the other jazz group sucks, and you're not. Whereas if you didn't think that, you might take something from them. Look, you talk about 2 key dimensions to effective cooperation. What are those 2 key dimensions?
So the 2 key dimensions are the task and the relationship. And the task means we get the work done, or we achieve what we were composed to achieve. And that may be, if you're talking about a book group or something, that may just be the satisfaction and edification of the members of the group. But in work teams, it usually means we have some sort of client that's composed the group for a purpose and that we achieve that purpose. But we shouldn't call groups effective if everyone ends the task and they all hate each other and they can never work together again. And so we need to have this relational dimension to effectiveness so that we're disqualifying these groups that burn themselves out in the course of doing the work together. And so we usually think, are members satisfied with their participation in the group? So it's a net positive in their own lives. And we also think about, are we building our cooperative capacity over time? Are we going to work together again? And can we work together even better the next time we work together?
You're unkeen on team-building exercises, which I suppose intended to sort of artificially reinforce groups. You've got a particular beef with a man called Bruce Tuckman. Tell us about him and team-building exercises generally.
So Bruce Tuckman, I think, he wasn't doing anything wrong, and he, to his credit, came up with an enduring model of group development that has these stages: forming, storming, norming, performing. Right. And because they rhyme, people have really latched onto them.
That's just not very jazz, is it?
No. But it turns out that this has led people to assume that what we need to do before we get onto the task is we need to, have this time where we kind of build trust and we establish social norms. And that's a necessary precondition for getting onto this performing stage. But that's the part that turns out to be wrong. And a lot of the team building exercises that are used today have this assumption.
Like falling backwards off a chair,
that's right.
all that paintballing.
Yeah, trust falls, going out and, building a campfire together or something. And these can have a purpose. There's nothing like inherently bad about them. But if your goal is to have your teams perform better, they're much less effective than having task-like simulations or just getting to work. And that if we can get people to, either practice and have training camp the way, jazz groups do, the way sports teams do, the way the military does, and anyone who has these like high-stakes performing teams, they practice, they have training, they do a lot of things before they start working together, but those things are basically like the task. But at work, that's not what we do at all. We assume we're going to do something that's nothing like the task we're going to do. We're going to go out and we're going to have trust falls, and then we're going to come in and that's going to help us somehow. And it just turns out that that's not very effective.
I've not done trust falls with my team. We should give it a go just to see what happens. Look, I also want to talk about Muzaff Sharif, a Turkish-American social psychologist, who says that groups affect our perception of reality or of truth. That seems like it's got sort of huge political import. Can you unpack that idea a little bit for us?
Yeah, so Sharif, he lived through all these horrible intergroup conflicts that, kind of in World War I, the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and there were all these different groups in his lives. And he saw how it was that membership in, often one political party or another, or identification with a certain group, whether it was the Ottomans or the emerging Turkish nationalists, colored people's perception of reality. And so he set about to sort of show this in a series of experiments to show that, when you are part of a group, that what you think is really happening is affected by what other members are doing. And he had these very cool experiments that are called the autokinetic experiments. And they take advantage of a flaw in human visual perception. And that flaw is, if you're in a really dark space and you see a light, so on a really dark night, if you're looking up at the stars, they appear like they're moving, they're vibrating. But that's actually our eyes' vibration, the muscle movement and things that our brain misinterprets as movement. So we took advantage of that, put people in these completely dark rooms and put a point of light up on the ceiling. And then he asked everybody, how much is this point of light moving? And what he found was that when people were in a group, whoever spoke first and said, I think it's moved about 2 inches, that estimate really affected what everyone else thought was happening. And that even if you replaced all the members of that group one by one, that norm that was set by the first person would persist.
Why do we do that? Is it just because our brains are faulty, frankly?
So it is, but it's not a bad strategy in general to say, if I'm unsure of the answer myself, to say, I'm going to rely on what Hugo's saying, that you said something.
I think that's a great strategy.
Yeah. And so, when we're unsure, we'll take whatever information we can get. And if somebody else, especially somebody that we identify with and we think of as being a member of our group, says something, we're like, I'm going to take that on as information and my first best guess of what's happening.
So is this something, because obviously that can have malign impacts, particularly with politics. The kind of thing we talk about a lot on this show. Is there some way to set, if you're establishing an effective group, perhaps in a workplace, you have to fight that, you have to resist it. You don't want this kind of group think to develop.
Yeah, absolutely. That, in essence, a lot of our work is to fight the dysfunctional side of our preference for conformity, that we have this prehistoric tendency to want to go along to get along. Because, to our brains, the threat of being ostracized from the group, of kicked out of the cave and being left to the saber-toothed tigers, is an existential threat to us. And that when we bring that into the workplace, we often don't speak up when we disagree. We don't, share information that we have. We don't share our perspectives. And so a lot of the interventions that we have to improve work groups are to create the conditions where people are, one, comfortable sharing what they know, sharing their perspectives, but then also actively encouraged to do so by leaders, by other members.
Look, I'm afraid we've got to leave it there. Look, among the many people who've been in touch, Ken says, this group guy is the most sensible man I've heard in ages. There you go. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Colin Fisher. And the book is The Collective Edge, Unlocking the Secret Powers of Groups. Thank you, Colin.
Thank you, Hugo.